One of the many things in our collective memory is the great thought of a road trip. When most people road trip, they will most likely use some part of the thousands and thousands miles of open road out there. All of these miles of road have a story. Each mile has a lot of history behind it. 1956, the Oval Office. Then President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act into law. This bill set into motion the construction of interstates. This would allocate $25 billion for highway projects into the year 1969. One of the large proponents of creating the highway system were car companies. While a lot of their lobbying work was done mostly during the 1930s, years before this bill was passed, still they were successful in the end because of both their efforts and efforts of other pro-highway lobbyists. But as with pretty much any large infrastructure project, someone will always be unhappy with it. Sadly, the creation of the national highway system was used to remove some minority communities from cities across the nation. While some plans for highways did run through more affluent large communities, a lot of these plans were not carried out as the people in those communities had the resources to fight these plans and prevent these plans from being put into effect. Moving forward to putting some pavement down, the funding model for the national highway system was 90% paid for by the federal government and only 10% of the funding had to come from a given state. There was enough funding allotted in theory for 40,000 miles of interstates to be created. The expected completion date for the whole project was supposed to be in 1972. Well, let's just say they didn't make the deadline that was set out for them in the first place. If we look at the total number of miles of road completed by the end of the 1970s, we can see that we're close to the number of miles stated to be completed by the year 1972. By the end of the 70s, the United States had about 39,777 miles of highway built out of a planned 42,500 miles. Also, around this time of the 20th century, there was increasing pushback to the national highway system, as the public at large began to increasingly turn to litigation to attempt to stop the expansion of the interstate system. As most people know, when you're driving on a highway, you almost always seem to hit a pothole. Potholes are pretty bad for you and your car, and they can cause all sorts of other issues in the meantime. So one of the ways to alleviate this problem is to maintain the roads that taxpayers spent so much money creating. The one issue with maintaining this large network of roads is that when the laws were passed, there were no plans on how to pay for the increasing yearly costs of maintaining it. January 1974, the Middle East stopped providing the United States with oil. This led to gas shortages across the country. So in response to this, the federal government would not approve any federal aid highway projects unless the state proposing the project would adopt a statewide speed limit of 55 miles per hour. The reason for this change is that cars would use less fuel. This was necessary to combat the shortages at the time. These restrictions were not fully lifted until the mid-1990s. Remember that fact, as the federal government has used this several other times where they used federal highway funding to control the actions of states in certain situations. Washington, D.C., 1976. The U.S. Congress passed a bill allotting $175 million per year for fiscal years 1978 and 1979 to help restore the highways that are both reaching the end of their designed lives and are suffering from heavier than predicted traffic use. The way the funding from this bill could be used was dictated by the 3 R's. The 3 R's stood for resurfacing, restoring, and rehabilitating. Later, a 4th R was added for reconstruction. Now, this was also expanded to allow for the funds to be used to expand existing roadways to accommodate more traffic. This was good for keeping the taxpayers' huge investment in the interstates safe and well maintained. We've all been stuck in traffic. We all know how much we hate it. Well, this is an issue the interstate system has had since the day it's opened. This has required that interstates be expanded to make space for higher traffic volumes. While funding data for the expansion of highways to accommodate higher traffic flow is not clear, we do know these projects can happen as they've happened in the past. Washington, D.C., 1981. In Washington, D.C., the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1981 was passed. This bill changed the priorities of the project to just getting the remaining mileage done. In addition to just getting the remaining miles complete, the minimum standards to which the highways were built were also changed and these standards were lowered to help speed up the project a little more. This reduction in minimum quality in exchange for slightly faster completion is a little concerning. Moving on now to the year 1982, when then President Ronald Reagan backed a proposal from Congress to raise the national gas tax. This increase in the national gas tax was 5 cents per gallon. This was done to help ensure the Highway Trust Fund had enough funds to help continue to both maintain and expand on the interstate system as needed. This proposal was received at the same time with both resistance and acceptance. This planned increase in the gas tax was something that the president had said he would never do. But then he realized that the increase in the taxes were going to be necessary in order to keep the highways in good condition for years to come. At the time, this gas tax raise would only on average cost about $30 more per year, about $80 in today's money. The added money that came in from the increased gas taxes was not put to waste. The added money that came in from the increased gas taxes allowed for the United States to get ahead of the deterioration of their interstates. This is a huge success for everyone, as it meant that the federal government could get ahead on maintaining the vast network of interstates that have become so important to the United States as a whole. 1991. The U.S. passed its latest bill related to the interstate system. The bill in question is the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1991. This act killed off the 4R system. This is one of the first plans on how to keep the interstates maintained into the future. But this bill implemented maintenance funding. The amount of money allotted to this new program was very similar to the outgoing 4R system. This new act also allowed for states to use their given funds to complete some preventative maintenance. Washington, D.C., 1998, the U.S. Congress passed the Transportation Equity Act for the 21st century. This new act expanded on the previous act and added the funding for the 4th R, which is for reconstruction. The Transportation Equity Act for the 21st century allotted $23.8 billion in additional funding for continuing to maintain the interstate highways. In addition, this bill also allowed for certain routes in Alaska and Puerto Rico to gain access to funding to maintain their highways. Lastly, this bill allowed for the $23.8 billion in funding to be used to build noise walls and new rest areas. These last two bills show a lasting commitment to keeping the highways maintained well into the future. Though as we continue to move into the future, the United States will need to find new ways to continue to fund and maintain the highways. Now, remember what I was saying several sentences ago? The federal government would not approve any federal aid highway projects unless the state proposing the project would adopt a statewide speed limit of 55 miles per hour. There has been several other times that the federal government has used highway funding to influence the actions of state governments. You may be aware that the legal drinking age in the United States as a whole is 21 years old. This is in part because of the federal government. The federal government began to reduce the amount of funds given to states if they did not change their legal drinking age to 21 years old. Another example of this is a proposal to require that all motorcyclists wear helmets nationwide. Though this act was repealed in 1991, it is another good example of how the federal government has used federal highway funding to influence how states act. Actually, there is one more attempt to influence the actions of states by using federal highway funding. This is in the year 2009 when Senator Chuck Schumer proposed that states would have to ban texting and driving as a prerequisite to receiving their highway funding. The cut to funding if a state did not comply would be a cut of 25%. That is quite a lot of funding that would be cut from state highway budgets. But that was another example of how highway funding could be used to control the way states enact rules to keep getting enough federal funding to keep their highways going. But what will the highway of the future look like? Well, it is always hard to predict what's to come in the future, but here's some of the ideas that are out there right now. One thing that is very cool right now is the invention of self-healing road surfaces. These are road surfaces that will repair themselves in the event that for whatever reason they become damaged by something. This could help minimize the amount of road work that is needed to keep highways in good condition. There are other technologies that are out there to both help improve the safety and reliability of the interstate highway system. While it is unknown what future innovations may be coming to the highway systems of the US, the future of the interstate highway system is looking bright. So if you enjoyed that video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, you can leave those in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you for watching.